Hi guys, my name is Diana. I'm 16. They say work hard to succeed, but sometimes your ambitious plans could be disrupted by an absolutely incredible intervention, like a tapeworm in your head, for example. This story began 2 years ago when my parents decided to separate. You see, my dad met a girl who was half my mother's age and decided to marry her. Of course, my mom was crushed. Their divorce was absolutely insane. They're still fighting for property and they hate each other. My mom has been very depressed since his betrayal. She didn't have any solid source of income and sold the bulk of our furniture and other property to cover the costs of her divorce and other debts. She was absorbed in her drama and had no time for me. My dad just sent me some pocket money, happy pictures of his new life, and was always too busy to meet me. Occasionally, I'd have really bad headaches during that period. I thought that the reason for that pain was stress and anxiety. I tried to spend as little time at home as possible, and that's how I started dating Billy, a guy from school. When I didn't want to go home, I would just hang out with Billy. He had video games and never bothered me with complicated issues. Perfect match. The only real sanctuary for me during that period was my music teacher, Ms. Anderson. I had been a passionate musician for my entire life. I had regular piano lessons with her, and she said that I had extraordinary talent. She'd tell me about music scholarship options, and we started preparing for auditions. These types of grants help to cover the costs of tuition, housing, books, fees, and so on. It was a great opportunity for me to start a new chapter in my life, independently, away from my parents and all that mess. Ms. Anderson has a son named Philip. He's my friend, and he plays the violin. Ms. Anderson suggested that we prepare an ensemble performance. I really liked his skills and was excited about this idea. We rehearsed together regularly and became good friends. From time to time, I had this feeling that, Philip understood me much better than my boyfriend. Time flew by very quickly. A month before my first audition concert, I came back home from school one day and saw some strange guy checking out my home piano. When he left, my mother told me she was going to sell our piano because she needed the money. I could not believe my ears. She lived in complete ignorance that her daughter was going to dedicate her life to music, even though I told her 1,000,000 times. We had a really intense argument. She told me to call my dad and ask for a new piano if it was so important to me. I finally realized her stupid plan. She was trying to force my father to pay her to not sell my piano. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, I called my dad. He had just spent a fortune on his wedding and honeymoon cruise, so he couldn't help me immediately. And he was going to miss my concert, of course. Mom was standing around the corner listening to the conversation and started to scream at him, and he just hung up. I officially hated my parents at that moment. I ran to my room, shut the door, and cried my eyes out. My headache was stronger than ever. I felt awful and called my boyfriend, hoping to get some advice, but he just joked that I should probably be applying to law school instead. I cried even more and told Billy that we definitely needed to consider a break. Ms. Anderson was the only helpful person in this situation. I got her permission to come over and play on her piano for as long as it takes. During that month, Philip and I managed to prepare for 2 scheduled concerts, the semifinals and the finals. Meanwhile, my mother sold my piano to get revenge on my father and never apologized for that. On the date of the semifinals, I woke up early to get myself together, and I had this strange headache again. As usual, I thought it was just stress and took some aspirin. My mom had gone on a business trip for a week. The concert was scheduled for 5 p.m., and I decided to go over to Miss Anderson's and Philip's. I was riding my bike, and I suddenly got very sick. My head twisted and cracked. I stopped on the sidewalk and fell on the ground. I woke up in the hospital. They injected me with a light painkiller, and I felt a little better. I was laying on a bed, and a doctor was staring at me. He asked a few questions, and they scanned my brain. I watched the doctor and his interns discussing the pictures of my brain with very concerned faces. I was so scared. I could barely remember my name at that moment. Finally, he showed me the pictures and said that they had found a huge, live tapeworm in my brain. I needed surgery immediately. The doctor said this surgery was dangerous because it could affect my memory. But without the surgery, I would definitely die. I asked him about my musical skills. According to the most pessimistic forecast, I could lose everything that I had been working so hard on. They left to prepare the documents and a room for the surgery. Suddenly, I remembered the concert. I grabbed my phone. It was around 4 p.m., and I had 1,000,000 of missed calls from Philip. He was already at the concert hall. I texted and said that I'd meet him there in 30 minutes. Then I called Billy to ask him to pick me up from the hospital. He said, "Stop calling me. I'm sleeping." Not only was he not eager to pick up his dying girlfriend from the hospital, he had also forgotten about my concert. I told him about the worm and about my risk of dying or memory loss, and he was disgusted. The first thing that he asked was whether it was possible to get infected through a kiss. He only cared about himself. That's when I finally told him, "Billy, I'm breaking up with you," and hung up. I got myself together, grabbed my stuff, and ran out of the building. I was lucky enough to catch a taxi right away. Thank God I had my performance dress with me. I changed in the car. The driver was shocked, but he reacted like a gentleman. We arrived to the concert hall in 20 minutes, just in time. The painkillers were still active, and I felt very confident, and everything felt a little surreal. Maybe that's why Philip and I performed well in a single burst. It was such a success. Everyone applauded. Behind the scenes, Philip asked about my lateness to such an important event, and I told him about the worm and the risks. He looked very frustrated. Then he hugged me and said that we had to go to the hospital immediately, but I told him to not panic and that I had a genius plan. In 2 days, we had to play the final concert, and I intended to perform no matter what. Philip tried to make me change my mind, but it was useless. He decided that this was the right moment to tell me that he loved me. At first sight, he just wanted me to survive at any cost. I also wanted to live, but I could not imagine my life without music. I felt responsible for both of us. After all, Philip didn't have a worm in his head. It would be unfair to bring him down, too. Philip finally agreed, but made me promise that we would go to the hospital immediately afterward if I got worse and screw the concert. We decided to spend those 2 days together and to not tell Ms. Anderson, because she would never have supported this crazy plan. She loved me like I was her own daughter. The hospital workers called my home several times, and I had to lie. I pretended to be my mother, and I told them that my daughter had gone on a school trip to another city and wasn't answering her calls. They told me that my daughter needed to come back to the hospital as soon as possible because the situation was critical. I felt a little guilty, but I had a reasonable excuse. As I rehearsed and relaxed with Philip, I realized that I had feelings for him, too. I had a headache, but pretended that everything was okay and took my mother's painkillers secretly in the bathroom. We watched movies and talked about our future goals and dreams. We obviously should have become a couple earlier. You know, when I faced the real threat of dying for the first time in my life, I realized how stupid and small my previous troubles were. In just 2 days, my health was continuing to get worse and worse. I felt just terrible. The final concert was a hot mess. I mean, it was not a complete disaster, but we made several obvious mistakes. Following the performance, I fainted behind the curtains, and Philip took me to the hospital. The same doctor met me in the ambulance. He said that he was amazed by my stupid behavior. He sent me into an urgent surgery. I was brought in at a very critical moment, and if we had arrived any later, I would probably be dead. During the surgery, my mom was sitting in the waiting room with Philip. She had just arrived back from her business trip and heard all the voice messages from the hospital. But Philip called her and explained the details, although they had never met before. They had a sweet conversation. Philip made Mom realize that selling my piano was a very unfair and cruel decision, but she still thought that he was an idiot to allow her daughter to take such a risk. After the surgery, the doctor said he could let me look at the tapeworm, but I refused. I was disgusted, to be honest with you. He recommended that I be very careful with pork and other risky products in the future, and told me that I should never ignore any mysterious pains again. As for my mother, she looked very upset and apologized for her selfishness. She promised to get my piano back and to never buy bacon again. Philip and I did not pass the qualifying round for the grant that day. The competition was too intense that year. But we haven't given up and are planning to try again next year. I need a couple of months to recover from the surgery and get some rest anyway. My new boyfriend is very supportive, as well as my father's new wife, by the way. We finally met after the surgery, and she seemed nice. Maybe it sounds strange, but the worm in my brain has managed to do what I failed to do, to restore friendship between my mother and my father. They chipped in and bought me a new piano, and their meaningless bickering has stopped, at least for now.